All right, we're just getting set up here. Let the feed sync up for a couple seconds. We'll be getting, we are live. It takes a couple seconds to really sync up the feed though. So let's give another 5. Okay. All right. Well, welcome to Chariot Tech Chat Tuesday. Did it again for Tuesday, March 29th, 2022, whatever the year is. I'm Ken Rimple.
Sujan Kapadia.
And today I'll learn how to spell my name too. Maybe that'll be useful. We are here to talk about all things tech. We've got some interesting articles for you to review, and we have a special guest interview today from one of our ETE speakers. But before that, I want to bring my screen up here. Let me do that real quick. And we'll talk through a few things, such as Chariot's blog. So first of all, if you're interested in what we're writing about, you can hit the Chariot blog. It's at chariotsolutions.com/blog in our little resources section, where you can also find our podcasts such as this one and ETE presentations and such. We have an article this week from last week, Spring Cloud Sleuth, a approach to adding distributed tracing from a brand new employee, Steve Wood. So that's a good one to check out there, talking about like a special feature of Spring that has like basically a distributed tracing key to things you're looking at. So that's really cool. We have blog posts there all the time. So that's something to look at from us if you're curious. We also have a ton of content on YouTube. If you go to youtube.com/Chariot Solutions, you'll see our main run of everything. And if you hit our playlists, which is the real secret thing here, you can watch all of last year's Philly Emerging Technologies for the Enterprise. You could take a look at women speakers throughout the years for us. You can look at a super playlist of all of the ETE videos we have online. And then you can see various shows, including Tech Chat Tuesdays. That's us right there. And you can certainly subscribe to any of those pieces of content and be notified. So please do. You can also hit us up of all places on things like Spotify. You'll notice there's Chariot Solutions there. You can hit us up on YouTube. You can hit us up on iTunes. And the music app. If you search for the podcast app for Chariot TechCast, you can find us there too.
Subscribe.
Yes, please subscribe. And hey, do me a favor, leave us a review or two, would you? Good ones only, please. But if you go to the podcast app in YouTube or in iTunes, we really don't have more than one review, mostly because I haven't pushed it. So please hit up Chariot TechCast there, and please give us a positive review. We'd love to have that. Main thing coming up that we're all focused on at Chariot is the Emerging Technologies for the Enterprise Conference. It's virtual this year, April 19th to 20th. It's nice and low cost right now until the 1st. However, we do have a special code. If you register and you enter TechChat, all capitals, you will get $25 off the conference. So that'll work, and that'll give you a little bit of a break. If you want to register multiple people, you can contact us. We have companies that do that periodically. They send 15, 20 people. It's a great show. So that's coming up. And we'll talk about one of our speakers in a little bit, Carson Gross, who's speaking about HTMX. And that's our feature for today. But first, let's go through some news. All right. So in Bleeping Computer and many other places, there was this note about an emergency Google Chrome update. So it was a 0-day attack. Get the ad out of the way here. Sergio Gatlin is the writer of this, just kind of pointing this out. If you have not updated Chrome recently, go to the Chrome About menu and take the update because there's a high severity 0-day bug out there in the wild. So I don't know what's going on with that video. It's a security advisory they published on Friday of last week, I believe it was. And so there it is. It doesn't really go into much detail, I think, about what the actual bug is. They're trying to just make sure you get it going quickly. Yeah, access to bug details and links may be kept restricted until majority of users are updated with a fix. Now there's 3 billion people? That can't be right. But many millions of people are using Chrome. And so they want to keep this kind of quiet is actually what the exploit is that's causing the trouble. At least they did earlier. CVE 2022-1096 is the exploit. It has an exploit against it. So update Chrome, because if you don't update Chrome and you hit the right site, they're going to hack you.
Yeah. There's a few things that I keep automatic updates on for, because because I generally don't like just getting software downloaded without my knowledge. But these happen so often in general, just the updates and security patches, that I do leave Chrome's updates automatic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really important. All right, so that's the big warning. Please update Chrome if you haven't already. Next thing, I've really been enjoying a lot of these little Rust-based tools that have come out, kind of like command line replacement tools. So the typical command line diff isn't super exciting, but there's one called Difftastic, and it's syntax aware. So, that's what it looks like, but I actually got it working. So where is my sample here? So here's your typical, it's color syntax coding just because I'm using, a git diff here as an example. So this is your typical git diff. You just do git space diff, whatever, with a standard built-in diff. And here is the same thing with Difftastic. So you can see it's really doing a good job at showing contextually where the changes are, syntax highlighting everything. Here's all my new code. There we go. So, and all I did to set it up was I followed the guide. So there's a Rust utilities have this thing called cargo, right? Difftastic. And so when I installed that and I made sure that the cargo bin directory was in the path, then that utility shows up. And then I just basically follow the instructions on the website, which we'll post in our links. And there was just an export, a GIF external diff, and that makes it so that that diff uses it. The tool is called diff-t to replace diff. And there are a bunch of these types of utilities out there. So, for example, there's a thing called Awesome Rust, and a lot of these languages and platforms have an awesome page that someone maintains. But this is a curated list of Rust code and resources, and you can see there are a whole bunch of utilities. He probably isn't in this list, that would figure, right? But there are a bunch of tools out there, one of which I installed was Prox. So that's a replacement for PS, for example. So if you're a Unix person and you like PS as a process status tool, there's a replacement tool for that. There's a whole bunch of these out there. There's like a helpful directory switcher tool that knows what directories you've been in, so you can type like little shortcuts to the names of them and immediately get there. So if you're interested in looking at some kind of enhanced command line tools, there's just a ton of them out here in this Rust unofficial. Also tools for building and everything else. So pretty cool.
Use Java from Rust. Interesting.
Yeah, some of these I don't know.
Wow.
Or
Did you
use
take a look
Ruby
at the
from Rust.
Difftastic code at all?
What's that?
Did you take a look at the Difftastic code at all?
I did not know. But here it is. It's open source, so you can check it all out.
Really cool. Okay.
Yeah, neat stuff. All right, go ahead.
All right.
What's
So
yours?
I don't know if folks know about this, but there's a Digital Markets Act, which has a lot of stuff in there. I'm going to focus on the privacy and encrypted messaging stuff. But basically, generally in Europe, so this article on platformer.news is talking about this act and how it's going to impact apps like WhatsApp that do encrypted messaging in a negative way. So in Europe, two big ideas currently hold sway among people regulating technology companies. One is that it should be easier to compete with tech giants. They're big movement and effort there around trying to break up monopolies, trying to allow smaller companies to be on a level playing field with larger giants like Facebook and Microsoft and Amazon, Google. And that a good way to accomplish this is to force their services to play nicely with others. So the Digital Markets Act gets into specific details about what size company and revenue has to reach, at which point it has to be interoperable with smaller services. So this landmark piece of legislation on last Thursday that would reshape the ways in which tech giants compete with their rivals. The act applies to what it calls gatekeepers, defined as any platform that has a market capitalization of 75 billion euros or more than 7.5 billion euros in European revenue. So like, for example, iMessage and WhatsApp, they would fall under this and would have to make their services in Europe interoperable with other messaging services. It would not impact Signal or Telegram. So The idea being here is that if WhatsApp, which is known for using Signal and being completely encrypted, has to now become interoperable with other services, they have to open up their systems to these smaller players, and it may undo a lot of the things around encrypted messaging and privacy that these apps tout. And recently, for example, like protesters in Russia, their phones, et cetera, were confiscated. They were gone through, messages gone through. So you can see that this kind of legislation can have a serious impact on privacy and communications. It's kind of scary, actually. So I'm going to closely follow how this plays out because it definitely impact what I use. I have WhatsApp on my phone. I have Telegram and Signal on my phone, and I use all three because there's different people that that use different apps, so I kind of have to have all three on there. But I may, if this goes through fully and Facebook can't push back on it, I may stop using WhatsApp. We'll see. I don't know.
And then you get to use another one, and suddenly it becomes really, financially viable. Suddenly that would have to conform. You'd have to switch again. That's just.
That's an interesting way to look at it too. It's like, okay, well, once you get big enough, you now have to share with others. So like, it doesn't seem fair, but we'll see.
Interesting. We'll have to keep an eye on that. Thanks for bringing that one up. Otter.ai, which is a really interesting AI transcription tool. Yeah. So what is it doing now?
So for folks that don't know about Otter.ai, it's been around for maybe a couple of years now, and you can use it to basically transcribe audio, meeting audio, namely. So you can have it running, and it can listen into your conversation, and it can transcribe it in real time. And it does a pretty decent job of the transcription. I've used it once or twice just to hack around with it about a year ago. So because of the pandemic and everyone working remotely, they've been gaining more and more market share. And they said now it's expanded beyond just individual users or personal use. Companies are using it, professionals are using it. So it's getting more enterprise features. And what they're trying right now is to be able to add AI-generated meeting summaries, which they have a long way to go, they themselves admit, but it's already proven useful in some contexts. So they mentioned the company's software looks at a lot of different factors to decide what are the most relevant points from a meeting. They look at topic words people use. They look at speaker dynamics, who's talking, what topics they discuss, when they change a topic. So it seems they're using different signals. This is something I find really interesting. Mentioned it all. In addition to summaries, Otter also offers a breakdown of who spends the most time in a meeting talking.
I want to see that one.
I really want to see that too. And then, so I went to the website because I was looking at their security and stuff, especially after the Digital Markets Act. I'm like, well, they have a lot of information. They're listening to all these meetings, exactly like what are their privacy policies and things like that. They say that we train our proprietary artificial intelligence technology on aggregated de-identified audio recordings. So they are using recordings that people that go through their service that you use for transcription. They aggregate and de-identify it apparently to train their algorithm. Only with your explicit permission will we manually review certain audio recordings to further refine our model training data. Even then, though, with that explicit permission, that kind of scares me. I mean, obviously,
is that like a switch for the whole thing that feature's on now, and everything you do from that point forward, it has it, or is it per talk?
It looks like if they're having issue with transcribing something like a specific recording or a piece of a recording where what they generate doesn't match what truth is, I guess they're trying to improve their algorithm, and they can ask, hey, do we have permission to manually review a snippet so we can try to refine our model training data? Right.
Good point. Interesting.
It's scary because the fact is the data is there, it's encrypted, but if you give them permission, they can get it. So it's always stored there and they have it. So that part of it scares me because that can change based off of policies, based off of company leadership. If it gets acquired by someone else who has different policies, who knows?
Right. Yeah.
They have other like Google and Facebook is trying these things too, but they make an interesting point at the end of the article where like Google, they make 99% of their money from ads. So they don't care about this enough, or he's like, if they really want to, they can roll out all these features to a larger user base faster than Otter.ai could develop because they already have the data and the teams to be able to go do it. I'm curious about this out though. Maybe we'll try this out one day just on like a one-on-one meeting between us.
It'd be interesting to do it during the podcast too, like fire it up, let it run, take the audio of the podcast and see what it does. So that could be fun too. It'd be nice to get textual transcripts of each podcast. And if that makes it easy, could be fun to add that to our stream. If you've been using Otter.ai or any other tool like it, please hit us up on our @TechCast Twitter account. Tweet to us and let us know you're using these things. Curious what you think.
Yeah, thanks, James Vincent from The Verge, for this article.
Awesome. All right, and you have one more, CodeEdit.
So this is, I don't know how much progress they've made on this, but it's purely open source native Mac OS using Swift UI to build a code editor, and they're looking for contributors. So I found it interesting just going through the Swift UI code, and it sounds like anyone can get on board and start contributing to it. I haven't downloaded it or installed it or played around it with myself, built it. But I'm always interested in how editors are coded. There's just so much neat things that go into an editor, and looking at Swift UI is so much better than looking at Objective-C and other variants back in the day for Cocoa development. If you just look at the Swift UI code, it's so much cleaner and easier to follow. That's actually the reason I kind of started looking at the code. So it's kind of cool to see server-side Swift UI for desktop apps on Mac.
Very cool. Yep, GitHub.com CodeEdit app, CodeEdit. Neat. All right. Well, so our feature today, we're going to be during the next couple of weeks, as long as people sign up. We've invited about 5 or 6 of our speakers, and the first one that has said yes to talking to us is Carson Gross. Let me just show you from the ETE site. I'll show you his session here. I would use search, but why not just search the web browser? So his talk, he's out in Montana, working remotely with his own company, Big Sky Software. His talk at ETE is called "A Return to Hypermedia: Solving JavaScript Fatigue Using the Fundamental Architecture of the Web." The reason he's talking is because he built a tool called HTMX. And so HTMX is a hypertext-based scripting engine so that you don't have to write a lot of JavaScript to get basic things done. And we talk about this in the interview. It's kind of like an antidote to using Webpack and large JavaScript frameworks.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That quote that you had there from him sounded a lot like, just imagine like Roy Fielding or Tim Berners-Lee saying something like that.
Right. Well, and actually he brings up Roy Fielding a lot in his research. He's going back to the HTTP spec and like the fact that HTML and HTTP already have this stuff covered. So that's his principle. Like, why do I have to write this giant, complicated JavaScript? And while we're talking about it, I'm just going to bring this up. Big Sky Software, that's him. And the projects he has also include something called, you'll like this, Hyperscript. And Hyperscript is HyperCard inspired dynamic scripting DSL for HTML. So you don't have to go into all the JavaScript business. Yeah. Looks very HyperCardy.
It really does.
Yeah. So I guess what we'll do is we'll play this interview we did last week with Carson, and then we'll kind of wrap up right after that. But Miles, take it away. Hey, thank you for being our first person to kind of highlight their talk for Philly Emerging Tech. We really appreciate it.
Sure.
And so what we're doing is we're just kind of talking to about 5 or 6 speakers right before the show. We do this every year, just kind of get a feel for who you are, your background, get people excited about seeing your talk.
Sure.
But I was watching a few of your interviews to kind of prep for this and looking and playing around with HTMX, and that is a cool API. And I want to talk to you about kind of the evolution of your thinking, how you started with it, what you were going to do. But so first of all, looking at your bio, you've been around a long time. You had a company that you recently sold.
Yep.
And now you're working for yourself, Big Sky Software, right? So why don't we talk a little bit about your career and like how you kind of evolved your web programming ideas?
Sure. Yeah. So I graduated in 99, I think, something around there. And I was doing a lot of web programming sort of early on. And it was, back in the day, it was CGI scripts and like Java applets. It was really, you know, it was kind
I
of, it
remember
was
those
just, it was
days.
an old, yeah, exactly. It was pretty, you know, there were good and bad things about it. I
Yeah.
actually like Java quite a bit still.
Yeah.
But, and I ended up working kind of in that original .com boom. I caught the tail end of it right after school, sort of right before everything crashed.
Hmm.
But I got some experience doing basically J2EE development at that point. And then I worked at a bank for a little bit, just doing programming. And I went to grad school at Stanford, and I wanted to focus on programming languages, because I was really at that time, I was really interested in programming languages. And
Hmm.
so I got a master's at Stanford with a focus on programming languages. And then when I graduated, I went to work for a company called Guidewire, which was, they do sort of, they sell software to insurance companies, but they're big enterprise style Java application, you know, it's installed internally. They've moved to the cloud since, but it was all,
Hmm.
at the time, it was all installed internally. And so I worked, and they had their own web framework that was sort of a custom framework. And I worked on that kind of tangentially. It wasn't my main focus. I mainly worked on a scripting language that they had there called Gosu. But I kind of always kept a foot in the web world. I was always poking around, and I had never been a big fan of JavaScript as a language person. I'd never been a big fan of JavaScript, but at the same time, saw these waves of JavaScript kind of washing over the industry. There was like I don't know if you're old enough, you remember DHTML back in like
Yep.
2005, right? Like that
Hmm.
was big thing, and then it kind of crashed, and but then it, you know, resurfaced. And I eventually left Guidewire and started up Lead Dino, which was the startup that we just recently sold, and that was a Rails app. So I'd always been playing around with Rails, and there were things about the Rails and the Ruby world that I liked better than Java. But this, and you know, in 2010, if you were starting up a software company, you were doing it on Rails.
Yep.
It was,
Absolutely. I remember those days.
yeah, exactly. So it was just the thing everyone was using. Um, and as I was building out, so I was building Rails apps, and TurboLinks was kind of a thing, but not really. It was just starting to come into existence. jQuery, you know, everyone used jQuery in 2010, and I was working on a big table that I needed to sort, and I was trying to do it in jQuery. I was just trying to do it in jQuery,
Yeah.
and it was a huge table, and the DOM was super complicated, and it was taking forever. And jQuery had this thing, I think it's called get or fetch, I forget what it's called, but jQuery had this thing where you could just get HTML from the server side and like poke it into the DOM.
Yeah.
And I finally, like, after pulling my hair out, I don't have any hair anymore. I'm in the same boat as you, but
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
But I just was like, I'm just going to try it servers. I'll just try and do the sort server side and see what happens.
Mhm.
And it turned out it was super fast. And so I got really excited about that. And I built up my own little wrapper around jQuery that kind of did this transactions in HTML with the server. I eventually ended up formalizing that, realizing, hey, there's a library here, and so that became Intercooler.js.
Mhm.
And so in 2013, I released that. And it was, you know, a wrapper around, it was based on jQuery. So it had this jQuery dependency. But the big idea there was to use HTML attributes to drive AJAX interactions with the server. So I just increasingly like formalize that notion of like, hey, let's just use attributes with like URL, you know, with relative URLs to grab content, to post, and all this stuff.
So I want to interrupt you there while we're talking about it. So that's about the time. You know, AngularJS, for example, was like one of the things that kind of broke out of the, you know, jQuery salting the earth with, you know, jQuery lookups and expressions and functions into like these single page applications, right? And so around 2013, Google went, maybe we should make this more complicated.
Yeah, they did.
2014, and then they went with their, you know, Webpack enabled stuff, and then React came about. It's interesting that, like, so one of the things that the AngularJS world did at the time was they were using custom attributes on HTML. And I see that Intercooler was using, like, for example, you have like IC-post-2 as an attribute on a hyperlink tag that would run a URL endpoint and replace content. So I see that you kind of took the same concepts. I'm not sure where you grabbed them from, if Angular was an interesting way of looking at a domain specific language built into HTML or not. But I like, you looked at something and saw it getting more complex and more all about itself, I think is what the term would be. Like, JavaScript, you got to live in JavaScript.
Yep.
And your thinking even back then was, this is the wrong approach for getting things done for you.
Yeah.
Was there a pivotal moment where you're just like, no, I can't keep going trying to add more script libraries?
I remember at Guidewire, I got accused. I was on the platform team, so a lot of really heavy hitting engineers. And I remember very vividly, I was pretty young at the time, and there was a senior engineer, and we were working on some design problem or whatever. And I was like, this is just too crazy, man. Like, we can't do this. And he looks at me and he goes, you know what your problem is? You give up too easy. And so I feel
challenge
like,
accepted.
And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to give up even more easily then, buddy. I'm Irish. Don't tell me stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I just, I looked at Angular and I liked the attribute stuff. That was new to me. This idea, hey, let's use attributes. But then it completely moved outside of the hypermedia world. And at the time, I didn't really. So I have to admit, in 2013, I didn't have a very good theoretical basis for integral. It was just easier for me to do. But over time, what I came to understand was that there was really a fork at that point in web development where we abandoned the hypermedia model, which at the time, again, I didn't understand super well. I understand it pretty well now. So we abandoned that and we went with this more thick client RPC. There's been this weird evolution of JSON APIs, and we're finally admitting that they're RPC and adopting RPC techniques around them. But there was a split. And so just almost out of obstinance and like my unwillingness to deal with the complexity of things like Angular, I just said, look, I'm just going to try going this way. And so Intercooler grew out of that. And then over time, I came to understand, because people, smarter people than me pointed out to me, hey, you're really staying in a RESTful hypermedia world. And so now I fundamentally appreciate that distinction. And HTMX and HTMX is really Intercooler 2.0. I basically pulled out the jQuery dependency, so it's a standalone library now. But both of those libraries are hypermedia oriented libraries. They want to interact with a server in the same way that the original model of the web worked.
Thank you, Roy Fielding, for that. He was right from the beginning from that perspective. He can still apply his techniques.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's almost a category error to say he was right, because he was describing it. He was just saying, this is what we built.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
And so it's like he's the guy who built it. So I think he's probably in a pretty good position to say what he had just built, or he was one of. There were obviously a lot.
Of course. Yeah.
I feel like I kind of stumbled into it on accident because I was just, again, maybe a little stubborn and contrarian. But now I very much appreciate, and especially the idea of the uniform interface in REST, which maybe I'll talk about in my talk. But it just makes for very flexible software in a way that when you see people be very upset about the fact that trying to deal with the management of JSON API changing, like versioning JSON APIs. Every time I see that, I'm like, you know what you should use? You should use hypermedia, because in
bring the content back.
You don't need to, like, the content is self-describing. You don't have to. You can change it all you want, buddy. It's all good. So
it's true. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No. Yeah.
Yes. So my thought was like, it's a pendulum, right? Like we started with, if we go way back, we started with green screens and dumb clients, and then we got PCs, and everyone said, oh, put half the application on the PC and we have client server, and then some crazy person, 3-tier client server, and then it imploded and the web came out, and the web is all server. And then the web got JavaScript and jQuery and became a little more client, and then it became fat client. And this is almost pushing back a little bit the pendulum towards content, like you said, hypermedia as the state of the application, where your tags contain enough of the information to hold the state, and then communicate with the server in a way where it says, give me more state, and that state's in a hypermedia format.
Exactly.
So I like the way that it's a good alternative to like a single page application platform like Angular or React or Vue. Have you had people that have converted over and told you what their experiences were?
Yeah, well, there's survival bias. Like anyone who's going to talk to me is going to
Mm,
say, "Hey, this was great." So, and I've seen some, comments that are like, "Oh, it worked okay for this," and it's not a silver bullet at the end of the
sure.
day. It's just an architectural style, and
Hmm.
it works really well for some stuff and not so well for other stuff. So, if I were looking at something like Google Sheets, some sort of online, very highly dependent, you change a cell here and like 15 other cells update, something like that's going to be really hard to synchronize. Roy Fielding would say coarse grain with via coarse grain HTTP interactions, right? Because
Hmm.
that's just, it's fiddly. There's a lot of little stuff to go wrong. On the other hand, something like an email client like Gmail, for example, there's not a lot of coarse grain interactions going on, or there's not a lot of fiddly interactions, I should say, excuse me.
Right.
And so that's something, that's an application that I think could be implemented pretty effectively in something like HTMX. And, I'm not a purist about this sort of stuff. One of the motivations or secondary motivations of HTMX is that I disliked seeing JavaScript eating the world.
Hmm.
And I want there to be a lot of, I like programming languages. I don't like Ruby, but I like that Ruby exists.
Hmm.
And say Lisp, like I'm not going to use Lisp, but I want Lisp to exist. And I want people who care about Lisp or Python or whatever to be able to use those programming languages and participate in web development without just producing a dumb JSON terminal, which is what a lot of web infrastructure is reduced to these days.
Yeah.
And so HTMX, because we're returning to hypermedia, because it's the hypermedia exchange, it takes that pressure off of you of, if you like Go or whatever, they're Haskell. We've got some Haskell people, lunatics that are doing Haskell web development. That's
Python,
fine. Yeah,
Java.
but
Yeah.
the whole thing, it's like,
Hmm.
fine. So you can stay in that world and just use hypermedia for your exchange.
And that's a good point because, like, if you think about it, if this whole term full stack, right? Because what is the full stack? It keeps growing every hour,
yeah,
and there's so much to learn, and it does take a long time to get good at most aspects of the full stack. Even like, for example, for me, I'm not a great CSS person, so I struggle
sure.
with that.
Yeah.
So what is it? So the less you have to use to get the job done if you're starting an application, if you're a strong server programmer and you do Django and you can output HTML in Django, you just add this and now you've got the majority of what you need for a basic application with good interactivity, right?
Yeah, that's right. And again, it depends on the application.
Of course,
right?
yeah.
So, and it also, like what I was getting at earlier is that I'm okay with HTMX being just a component within a larger application.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if you have a settings page that's just dumb forms posting things to a server, well, that's wheelhouse stuff for HTMX. Maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
not right for the main application, or maybe there are parts of your application that need something a little bit stronger, but you can reduce the complexity at least of the stuff around your main app quite a bit by using something like HTMX. And you're exactly right that what you're able to do, because you're going to be producing HTML anyways, right? HTML is just part of the stack. Like, accept it, move on with your life. If you can make that part of your stack more powerful, and if you can do it in a way that doesn't add a lot of conceptual complexity, which I hope HTMX does not, then what you've done is you've basically taken something that has to be there anyways. You made it more powerful, and you can drop these middle tiers. You can drop routing, client-side routing, and all. Just drop all that stuff. Just use the server, and you get a much simpler stack. And if you can achieve the usability that you want using that, then you've got a much more usable or a much more maintainable system. And the possibility of full stack development once again becomes plausible in a way that it's not when you've got this hyper specialization of front end and back end and this JSON API split between them.
Well, I got one for you. We were talking about all this stuff. You were doing an interview with someone from JetBrains last year. I think it was for the Python group. Yeah, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And you guys were talking about some of the things that are just dirt simple compared to what they were if you're doing it on, let's say, a React or Angular app, which I'm very familiar with, like security. We have to deal with JSON web tokens and and expiring them and renewing them and all that and holding them somewhere. And you're like,
I
just
know.
use cookies and HTTP. That's all you got. And
If
I'm like, oh yeah, those
yeah.
things.
Yeah, it is actually way easier than you might think. I've get people that come to me and they're like, how do you do security? And I'm like, how do you
Like the
not
web does.
how do you not do security? It's
Right.
just, that's the thing that the thing does. This was a solved problem, and it only became, and this is, I think, a danger that you run into. We're developers, and so we like abstraction, and so we're constantly looking for places like, oh, we run into a problem, let's add an abstraction. And I think that that's good. And some, I'm an Aristotelian at the end of the day. Sometimes that's good. You got to be balanced about it. But there are times, and I think we're in one right now with the web, where the best thing to do is just to say, I'm just going to cut this whole thing out. Like, forget about it. Let's like go back to basics, and let's think about hypermedia and how that worked. And if we do that, it's not going to be right for everybody, because nothing's right for everybody, but it is going to save an awful lot of complexity in many cases. And if it fits your application domain, then guess what? You're going to be able to take all that complexity that you normally would be dumping into a crazy front end library and dump it into domain logic that's actually adding value. The thing that's actually, because if everyone's got a React apps are no longer a differentiator. It's like, what you're doing, it's your special sauce on the server that's going to differentiate you from your competitors. So that's my.
So now let's talk a little bit about, you have another one out there, another library that you might tangentially reference in your talk or not, I don't know, but Hyperscript, which actually harkens back to HyperCard's language, right?
Yep. Yeah, it does.
Which is cool. So this is like, would you call this like a DSL for event-driven JS, basically?
Yeah,
a simple domain-specific logic keyword thing?
Yeah, it is. It's a DSL for sure. That used to be a big thing. You're old enough.
I know.
Remember.
I'm old.
Like 2000s, everyone was DSL this. You just made a DSL at the drop of a hat. These days, everyone wants to use JavaScript for everything, and I understand. I understand that, but I don't like it. I like DSLs, and I like DSLs. You do, these days with editor support, you do have to put more work in than, back in the day when we were all using Notepad or whatever. So Hyperscript is a DSL for the web, and it's for the front end, and it's very event driven, and it is based on HyperTalk, which was the scripting language of HyperCard. HyperCard was an old technology that was on the Mac, that was kind of the web before the web, but it was all local, but it was very cool. It's what I grew up programming in when I was very young. And so I just remembered that. And I created Hyperscript because when I ported Intercooler.js to HTMX, what I realized is there was this functionality that was useful in Intercooler, but that wasn't really focused on hypermedia exchange. And so I wanted to really have HTMX be a pure, simple, basic library that would let you do hypermedia exchange via Ajax. And like, that's what it was, and that's it. But there was this other functionality, and I looked at it, and I'm a programming languages person. I like making programming languages. And I said, you know what? I think there's a programming language here. And it seemed like it was really event oriented. I like events a lot. So I like it when JavaScript libraries, especially when they emit events, because you can hook in real cleanly to them. That's how I like integrating things. And HTMX fires a bunch of events, and that's great. But the problem with it is that if you want to hook into those events, you have to use JavaScript, and JavaScript is okay at some sort of event integration, like there's on-click attributes and so forth, but that doesn't let you handle the general case of like, I've got a library that emits like a random event. Where do I put that? Do I put that in a script tag somewhere else? Like, do I separate it? And I didn't want that separation. So I wanted something you could embed directly in the DOM. And so all of that kind of came together with this idea of like, okay, let's just do a scripting language that is complementary to HTMX, works well with the HTMX event language, and gives you an escape hatch when HTMX isn't enough to bounce out and do a little bit of light scripting, but keep the focus on the DOM. So keep the code in the DOM. So when you write Hyperscript, for the most part, you're writing it directly in the DOM. So you're putting your logic right there. So it's a violation of, people I'm sure are screaming right now, separation of concerns.
Talk to Vue.js about that, where you've got like script and style file and,
Yeah,
whatever the other is. Yeah.
Yes.
HTML all in one file. Yeah.
Yeah. So people are doing that now. And it's,
Yeah.
Alpine is another, I think, technology that does exactly that. And people are okay with that. There's
Right.
there's an essay on the HTMX website on the /talk page called locality of behavior. And I'm trying to codify that as a way to push back against separation of concerns as a design center, which it's, valid. We can balance on all things. That's fine. But there's also this idea that when I've got a button and it does something, I want to look at that button and see it. I don't want
you
that
show it exactly in the talk, like you're like, or in the white paper you built there, the blog, where you show like, here's the thing I want to do. I want to do this event. Here's the jQuery, and here's the one line of HTMX to operate on. I'm like, oh yeah.
And you can look directly at the thing. You can look at the button and see what it's doing. You don't have to know about some other file that hooks in this functionality. So, so Hyperscript, it's got a funky syntax. It's kind of English language, natural language style. It's just inspired by this older scripting language. I love it. It's a passion project. It's a fun little project. Not something I would, if it doesn't grab you, I wouldn't push you to try it. Whereas
and you don't necessarily need to use that one. You could use, like you said, the other one that you had mentioned. What was it again? It was
a lot of
Alpine.
people use Alpine because Alpine's just straight JavaScript. You don't have to be funky. It lets you do embedded JavaScript, which is it's a great library. Caleb Porzio is a great guy, very smart.
Right.
So,
cool.
But and then it's got some other kind of funny features. One major feature of Hyperscript is that it's something called async transparent. So that means you don't have to deal with promises. The runtime actually resolves all the promises for you, and so when you're writing code, you don't need to do awaits or anything like that.
That's nice.
The language itself, because to me, if you're writing await, you're no longer in a scripting language. You are now in a programming language. You're not scripting anymore.
With all the things that means with exception handling and everything else. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So I really wanted to make it higher level, much simpler. And so just for light scripting, that's what that's what Hyperscript is for light front end scripting. I apologize if you can hear my dogs. They're going crazy.
Nope, can't even hear them, believe it or not. I have dogs too, but luckily I'm at the office.
My dogs are like right behind my office and they're doing that. So
I literally can't hear anything. So that your mic's working well for that. All right. So then I guess my other question is we're kind of teeing up to talk about the actual talk is like, how do you manage these projects? Do you have contributors that help you out? Are you all solo? Like, how do you approach like dealing with feature requests and things like that?
It's pretty chaotic, I got to admit. I do have some really smart people that are helping me, so thank goodness.
That's great.
Some people have just jumped on it, but it hasn't been. I don't do a great job of managing it. I'm a good programmer, but not a great manager. And it's, when I can find, I teach at a university.
Yeah, you do that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I work at a company. And so I don't have a ton of time that I can dedicate to open source work, but I do have sponsors for my open source work. And so I try and, I try to take at least one day every couple of weeks and put in some good time managing the projects, but it's pretty organic at this point. And we've been lucky. The community around it has been, it's because it's sort of a different thing. I think it attracts kind of a different crowd. So a lot of people that have, if you're young and you've never seen the hypermedia model, you look at HTMX and it's just like, what is this?
Yeah.
So I've attracted some older guys, although I've got a really young kid in college still from in Turkey, Dennis, who helped me out with Hyperscript, and he's unbelievable, and he knows the web better than I do.
That's awesome.
Sometimes. And so, I just think I got kind of lucky there. I've got some guys that know server side events and WebSockets really well, which I'm not. I wanted to focus mainly on the Ajax stuff. So it's just kind of organic though. And there have been times when my wife is looking at me going, how much time are you going to put into this?
Doing this,
giving away for free.
It's 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. Are you going to sit down and watch TV?
Yeah. Luckily, I got lucky. I did the HTMX rewrite right when COVID hit, and so everyone was at home.
Who's doing anything else?
There was nothing to do. I was like, all right, I'm not going to go crazy watching the news. I'm going to build this thing. And so
that's good.
So that helped a lot. That really got that over the hump. these days, that both of those libraries are fairly, I don't want to say they're mature. They're, still only a couple of years old, but I'm not churning features through them. Especially HTMX is pretty, is pretty good. I think the API is pretty close to right. So
You also have extensions to it, right? Like someone could write an extension if they need to, I would guess.
Yeah, exactly. So that was one of the problems I had with Intercooler was that I kept dumping features in. And so I explicitly designed an extensions API for HTMX and then also integrated it, or at least designed it to be integrated with Hypermedia, or excuse me, with Hyperscript, so that both of those would take pressure off the core of HTMX so that HTMX can just focus in on exchanging Hypermedia with a server. And that's it. That's all it's going to be.
So htmx.org is the website for the HTMX project. Hyperscript.org is the website for Hyperscript, and your bigsky.software.
Bigsky.software, yep. For all your Hypermedia consulting needs. Give me a ring.
So let's talk about your talk then. So you're going to give a talk at ETE in a couple of weeks. What's the main focus? Obviously, it's HTMX itself, but what are we going to get out of you in about 60 minutes of talking?
Yeah, what I'm going to try and show, and this is one thing that I've had trouble with in general, is people don't, they don't, when I talk about, oh, we'll use Hypermedia or we'll use HTML, is the way I usually, people don't know what Hypermedia means.
Yeah.
They'll just say, like the clunky refresh thing. No, we're not doing that, right? And I get that. And so what I really want to drive home in this talk is just how much you can achieve using Hypermedia. So the classic example that I give is active search, where you type a little bit into an input and then a new set of the results update as you're typing. And that's the sort of functionality that most people, when they see that, they assume that, oh, you have to use view or something like that. Well, it turns out that you can use a relatively simple, like I think it's 3 or 4 attributes in HTMX, and you can use Hypermedia to achieve that same user experience with just none of the complexity that comes along with view. And so people are suffering to some extent in the industry from JavaScript fatigue. And so here's an example where you don't need to deal with a bunch of JavaScript to make this happen. And so I'm going to go through some demos like that, some of the more sexy demos, infinite scroll, things like this, to really drive home the fact that, hey, you can achieve this user experience with Hypermedia and with relatively simple annotations directly in your Hypermedia. And we can stay within the original RESTful model and all that. And this can be a cure, or at least a partial treatment for your JavaScript fatigue. You can maybe reduce your JavaScript usage to just what it was originally intended for, which was small enhancements to the existing DOM API that was there. Or if you're really adventurous, maybe you can try out Hyperscript and see if that is fun or not. So that's basically going to be the focus of the talk, is trying to demonstrate, like, look, you don't need to do all this crazy stuff for at least these UI patterns, and this will help alleviate some of the complexity and the headaches that come along with that complexity in modern JavaScript frameworks.
I like the partial treatment for your JavaScript fatigue. It's like the white light next to you in the middle of the winter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we need those. I live in Montana, and we need those up here for sure.
I'm sure. Yeah, you're getting north. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, listen, I'm really looking forward to your talk at ET, and thanks so much for taking the time with me today, Carson. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right, Carson Gross. Yep. Take care.
See you.
For the week, if you remember to go to phillyemergingtech.com, you will see that you can sign up right now. They're the open registrations still available. And if you use TechChat, all one word, uppercase, as your discount code, you will get $25 off of that even after our early bird is over. So again, special thanks to Carson Gross, who was a great interview. Check out bigsky.software and htmx.org and hyperscript.org for all your interesting HTML-driven front-end interactivity and Hypermedia. Until the next time, I'm Ken Rimple, and thank you from me and Sujan Kapadia.